They charged into battle with nothing but iron and faith, knowing that most would never see the next dawn. For a medieval soldier, every step in the mud could be your last. Rain lashes armored footmen as they trudge through churned fields, faces grim behind steel helms. They advance into the unknown. Mud grips their boots like hands. The weight of chainmail pulls at their shoulders. They charged into battle with nothing but iron and faith, knowing that most would never see the next dawn. A hand grips a sword hilt tight. Rust and rain are indistinguishable now. A horn sounds, thunder answers, shields lock, arrows hiss. The line tenses. One soldier breathes deeply, fog escaping his visor. Metal clangs, a blade draws. The earth trembles beneath marching feet. Each step is a wager against blade, bolt, and plage. They don't march for glory. They march because they must. Every sound is sharper when death is near. Smoke curls over the field. The sky churns. The line surges into arrows, into iron, into fate. There's no turning back. Not now. Faces show purpose, but not hope. Tonight, we march into the brutal truth. Medieval warfare was less a profession and more a sentence. A sword lifts skyward. Armor shines with rain and resolved just before it vanishes into the charge. Dawn barely touches the earth, shrouded by low clouds and whipping sleet. Tents buckle in the wind, canvas snapping like bones. Within the mudslick rows, Wolf, the infantryman, crouches near a dying fire, blade in hand. He wipes it, slowly blood, soot, and frost clinging to the edge. His breath comes in white clouds. His teeth chatter as he bears them, part cold, part defiance. A spark skips across the steel. His gauntlet tightens on the hilt. From far off, the first low thump of war drums rolls through the air, slow, steady, coming closer. They stood at the edge, prepared to step into the abyss at first light. Brother Finn moves solemnly down the line, robes clinging to his frame in the freezing mist. He flicks holy water onto bent heads, lips murmuring Latin prayers no one fully understands. The recruits tremble. Tears streak their cheeks and vanish into mud. Some clutch wooden crosses, others clutch their blades. Wolf stands now, shouldering his pack-rusty arrowheads, inside jingle like morbid charms. He makes the sign of the cross with a shaking hand, holding tight to a leather-wrapped reliquary pressed against his chest. Each droplet from Finn's fingers rings sharply on steel-anointed armor under a dying sky. This isn't just ritual. It's resignation. The trumpeter lifts the horn. A single note cuts the air clear, cold, final. Soldiers move, not in step, but in surge. Shields rise. Spears tilt forward. Mud splashes high as the front line lunges into the trench. Wolf breathes in one slow, steady, then charges. His eyes don't blink. His face holds no hope, only momentum. The field erupts, men shouting, armor clashing, drums swallowed in chaos. Boots slip, steel crashes. The line becomes a wave. In that roar is everything. Fear, fury, faith, and then darkness. A cut to black, just the sound of charging men and the storm behind them. Kevlar vests snap into place. Ballistic helmets lower over steady eyes. A modern infantry unit checks night vision optic screen silhouettes blinking across screens. Radios crackle with encrypted precision. Smash cut. A medieval conscript fumbles with rope, tying it through the dented hinge of a mismatched helmet. His shield is splintered. His mail rusts in the joints. Side by side, steel meets carbon fiber. Data meets desperation. Medieval, no comms, no night vision. Modern, GPS, thermal imaging, encrypted radios, They fought blind, in armor not made for them, driven by command and chance. Digital systems calculating enemy movement, in the other, a hand-carved spear and a prayer whispered into mud. Today, survival is planned. Medevac helicopters lift wounded troops in minutes. Trauma care begins mid-air. In 1411, survival was a coin toss soaked in blood. No doctors, no protocol, no names recorded. Modern infantry fatality rate, less than 1% per tour. Medieval levy survival. 1 in 5, for every step forward, 5 fell behind and mourned, unnamed, undone. History doesn't list the fallen. It counts the survivors. Modern forces are issued rations formulated for balanced protein, salts, calories measured to the gram. Mr. Ease, stay warm in your hand. Back then, gruel, rotting pork, bread so hard it cracked teeth. The hungry chewed leather. A modern soldier tears open an MRE pouch. Beside him, a peasant hand shakes as it breaks a stale loaf. Recovery then meant surviving the wound if you didn't die of rot. Field amputations were done with saws, not sedation. Modern antibiotics, IV fluids, rest. Medieval poultices, bone saws, whispered last rites. They marched, not on food, but sheer fear and will. Modern war is a machine. Precise, coordinated, backed by rescue and retreat plans. The medieval battlefield was chaos in mud and blood. Orders dissolved in smoke. Steel collided in confusion. Armor was borrowed or looted. Weapons often dulled by age. Still, they marched. We marvel at today's armor and logistics, but they marched to slaughter, armed with hope and half-rusted steel. Soundscape, thunder rolls, not of storm, but of centuries colliding. One soldier disappears into dust, another into data. But both walked forward, not knowing if they'd walk back. To be a medieval soldier was to step into annihilation with open eyes. Training was scarce. Many recruits where farmers handed a spear and a direction. Formations faltered after the first clash. There was no drill, no doctrine, armor. Maybe a padded jacket if you were lucky. Helmets were mismatched, often borrowed. Swords dulled from past use, not practice. They didn't train to survive. They prayed not to be first in line. A line of conscripts stands in the morning, fogsome barefoot, some armored in scraps, all silent. The only preparation was fear. The only plan, stand and hope. War drums rise over the sound of shallow, anxious breath. Spears tremble in muddy hands. This wasn't a profession. It was a sentence. In this episode, we peel back the myth of the medieval warrior and reveal the reality beneath the banners. We'll uncover how levies were raised with barely a week's notice. How commanders leaned on terrain, weather, and raw terror to force a win. And how the greatest killers weren't blades, but disease, thirst, and the cold. You'll see how soldiers fought not always for glory, but for lord, village, or fear of what waited behind them. Expert voices guide us military historians, decoding crude tactics. Trauma surgeons reading wounds from skeletons, and bioarchaeologists reconstructing battlefield graves. Every infection, every command, every broken bone tells the story of a war machine built from human desperation. This is not chivalry. This is survival, sharpened and spent. Prepared to walk through the fog of medieval war, not behind a polished knight, but beside the man who never had a chance. We'll march through mud, shield walls, and screams into the brutal systems that turned peasants into corpses and faith into fuel. This is not the romantic myth. This is the soldier's truth. Brace yourself for a march into mud, blood, and bone where dying was normal and survival miraculous. A rusted helmet sinks into wet earth. A horn blares, echoing through empty fields. Then silence, just a slow, steady heartbeat, and the cold. The wheat was still high when the horn blew. A low, throaty blast that rolled down the valley like thunder from a sky that hadn't yet darkened. In the village below the keep, scythes dropped into furrows. Men turned from the fields, eyes wide, hands already reaching for what little gear they owned. In the smoky confines of the hall, names were scratched onto muster rolls, thick parchment inked in red. A priest raised a bound book. Peasants knelt, dirt still caked beneath their nails, and swore fealty with trembling hands, the firelight flickering across anxious faces. Their voices echoed in the stone room, oaths not only of loyalty, but of submission. To ride, to bleed, to die if called. There was no training, no delay. When the call came down, you marched or you served at the whim of your lord, bound by custom and faith. Fealty wasn't ceremonial. It was enforced in the marrow. This was service not by desire but by inheritance. You served at the whim of power and paid with your bone when your sword failed. The next morning, the yard clattered with preparation. A blacksmith hammered late into the night, sparks leaping like fireflies as dull iron blades were reworked and handed to boys who had never held more than a plough handle. There was no standard issue, only what could be scrounged, inherited, or stolen. One man strapped on a rust-speckled breastplate, another tied a sackcloth pad around his shoulders. Most wore patched gambesons, some threadbare, some still stiff with blood from another war. Shields were discs of limewood, cheap and light, their paint flaking in the rain. Axes, spears, swords all forged from recycled iron, their weights and lengths decided by whim or chance. Village smiths did what they could with what little they had. And then came the packing. Ox-drawn wagons groaned under tents, salted meat, spare boots, and firewood. Everything not nailed down was brought or burned. The line stretched across the rutted road like a caravan of hope and fear. With every pound of iron, they carried the weight of uncertainty and hunger. Foraging parties often rode ahead, but more often they fell behind, starving, scavenging what fields remained untouched, or robbing what villages still stood. The march was a gamble, supplies thin, stomachs thinner. When battle loomed, fear took form in a line. Shield wall formations built from pure resolve, planks of men locked shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping like the scales of some ragged beast. If they held, the line became a wall. If they cracked, it became slaughter. Cavalry thundered on the flanks, hooves pounding through mist and muck. Archers raised their bows with calloused fingers, loosing volleys in smooth rhythm. The arrows hissed across frozen fields, their flight nearly silent until the scream of impact. Commands were shouted, not sent. Horn blasts and flags were the language of chaos, interpreted only by the lucky or close. And terrain was as deadly as any sword. River crossings turned into bottlenecks. Mud sucked down boots and soles alike. A well-timed charge on soft ground could end a formation in seconds. Their formation depended on discipline, not innovation. Hold the line or die. There was no second tactic. Centuries later, the mud still speaks. Peat bogs yield their dead reluctantly. Twisted skeletons rise from the soil, some blindfolded, others bound at the wrists. They were not always killed in battle, but often after it. Betrayal left marks deeper than blades. In one grave, bodies lie stacked like timber. Their bones show the rhythm of violence. A shattered shoulder, a caved-in skull, a jaw split clean by steel. And yet, among these dead, there are signs of survival. Arms rennet at odd angles, legs bowed from old fractures. They had lived through war once only to fall again. A CT scan peels back time. Layer by layer, mud gives way to bone, then to story. The battlefield didn't forgive and scars couldn't save you. In the end, they returned to the mud from which they came and to which they were always bound. The battle didn't begin with swords drawn. It began with the march. Men trudged for days beneath the weight of 25 to 30 kilograms mail, shield, sword, water, food, and whatever else they could not bear to leave behind. It pressed down on their backs, ground their feet into the road, wore away at body and mind. Professor Simon Carver, arms historian, stands beside a modern soldier. Their kit weighed up to 30 kilograms. Marching under such burden shattered many before the battle began. The soldier adjusts a sleek Kevlar vest. His medieval counterpart slumps under the slosh of a poorly fitted helm and splintered shield. They collapsed before the battle even began. And still they marched. The lucky were only wounded. CT scans show arrowheads embedded in joints, shattered sinuses from blunt strikes, femurs fractured clean through. But what killed wasn't always the blow, it was the aftermath. Wounds festered, cuts turned black, arms swelled with pus. Battlefield amputations were performed, with sores washed in blood, not water, no anesthesia, no antiseptic, just cloth between the teeth and someone to hold you down. An X-ray reveals a leg rotted from within. Another shows splinters of iron inside a ribcage, untouched for centuries. On campaign, every scratch could become lethal, and many did. Some survived. Fewer endured. Among the skeletons, some show the lines of old battle's bones, misshapen from healing. These were the strong, the fortunate, or the divinely protected. Dr. Helena Marsh, military archaeologist, gestures at a worn spine, bent from years of weight and war. Each campaign was a lottery. Only the lucky, the fit, or the extremely brave survived. A veteran hobbles forward, leaning on a crutch made from splintered oak. He passes a line of boys, fresh-faced and stiff in their borrowed armor. They stare ahead, unblinking. Muscle could save you, but even the strongest die in the mud. The screen fades to black, then flickers. A CT scan fades in, an arrowhead lodged deep in a knee, bone shattered around it like a broken plate. The image slides, overlays, and reforms into a modern leg, wrapped in Kevlar. The joint protected by ballistic-grade composites. Here lies the promise of progress. Then, a thin hope behind thin armor. Now, survival is measured in layers, technology, and training. But the ground beneath is the same. The overlay dissolves. The Kevlar fades. The shattered bone returns, raw, jagged, and buried in mud. No armor forgives gravity. But we have learned to stand. Dawn cracks over a hush of cold. Campfires choke their last breaths into the mist, while the frost lays its pale claim on rows of patched tents. Straw mats lie limp, mottled with sweat and ash. Wolf shifts on his pallet, breath misting before his cracked lips. He rubs his hands briskly and chews the end of a leather strap, not from hunger, but habit. Nearby, Lady Ira methodically adjusts the feathers on her arrows. Each exhale crystallizes in the air, briefly silvered by light. The hiss of frost under bare feet, the brittle snap of straw as men rise, joints stiff with cold. From a distance, the camp stirs like an animal waking with too many wounds. Another day of marching toward mud and death begins, yet the living rise. Driven by fear, duty, and something harder to name. A whistle cuts the cold. The drill sergeant's bark chases men from their stupor into mud-slicked ranks. Wood shields scrape into place, clumsy hands gripping rawhide straps. Ragnar reins in his mount as it skitters sideways, hooves caught in rut and bog. The horse's breath steams like smoke from its nostrils. Eyes wide, Wolf's boots slip as he takes his place in the wall. The line lurches, reshapes, no rhythm, just raw muscle, learning rhythm by pain. Boots slap wet earth, shields clang. Chainmail jerks with each move, unforgiving. There was no grand formation, only breath-steady, step-press, survival-willed discipline. The army moves, a rattling procession of tired feet and creaking wagons, axles groan, oxen low, supplies jostle and clatter half-spoiled grain, buckets, broken tent poles, the air reeks of straw, sweat, and iron. Soldiers wrap rawhide around cracked soles, the skin beneath angry and red. A wheel sinks in a mire, trench-shouted curses follow. Ragnar's mount steps sideways, nostrils flared at a splash of unseen depth. Wolf walks with the gait of a man already limping. His eyes lock forward, unblinking. Every mile burned muscles like fire. Every rickety wheel, another sigh of fatigue from both beast and soldier. Near midday, a break not rest, but diversion. Foraging parties peel away from the path. Wolf carries a crust of stale hardtack between his teeth, jaw aching with each bite. Ira ranges ahead, bow ready, eyes scanning through skeletal trees. A crow calls from above 3 short caws, then gone. Wolf stomps frozen mud, trying to scare something out. A hare, a bird. Only silence answers. Ira looses an arrow into brush mist. The men chew in silence, shoulders hunched to conserve warmth. Food was a luxury in battle season. Each crumb was hazarded yet a breath of life. Brother Finn kneels in frostbitten silence. Before him, a body, not the first, not the last. The soldier's neck is bloated, lips purple. With hands numb from both cold and repetition, Finn binds the corpse in vinegar-soaked linen. The smell singes his eyes, but he works fast. A shallow pit yawns behind him. He says the words soft, fast, tired. A cross traced in the air. Then the shovel. Dirt falls over a mud-streaked helm. The soldier, beneath it, unnamed. He buried bodies, not as much for the dead, but for the living to stave off plague and wicked dreams. The alarm comes like a shout under water. Raiders, the line tightens in a soggy clearing. The ground sucking at boots with every step. Wolf drops his shoulder, shield raised. The wall tries to hold, but footing fails. Mud swallows ankles, then knees. Spears snap as the enemy presses. Screams ripple across the field. Ira steps lightly to higher ground, her bow singing through the clash. An arrow finds a throat, then another. Wolf lunges, his sword bites, but the mud steals its return. Each step was a gamble. One misstep could mean drowning under mud and steel. A cleaver arcs toward Wolf's chest, but clangs, halted by his battered mail. The force drives him back, breath caught in his throat. He gasps air thick with blood and panic. Around him, men fall with sounds like meat dropped from height. Someone screams. Someone doesn't. Wolf finds his footing again. The mail has buckled, but not torn. His sword rises once more, as if held by memory alone. He lived that second. He'd die in 1,000 others each. A wonder he stood at all. Evening falls, like an old cloak, heavy and threadbare. Under torchlight, Brother Finn crouches beside the wounded. A man's wrist hangs open, flesh peeled back from gauntlet edge. The wound stinks. Finn pours vinegar. The soldier jerks, then sags. Ira kneels beside him, hand on shoulder, whispering his name until his eyes fix again. Firelight dances across their faces. The cloth wraps, blood seeps. They called it casualty, but this was Karan, act of defiance against the void. The campfire becomes a shrine. Smoke drifts upward in lazy swirls, chased by the wind. Wolf leans in, his voice hoarse as he recounts a tale half memory, half myth about a village defense that lasted 3 days. Ira listens, murmuring her namesake's story. A woman archer who held a tower alone. Laughter comes softly, like a mercy. Then silence again. Eyes drift into flames. The shapes, they're more real than memory. Legend wasn't for glory. It was for hearts that might break by night's end. A stretcher creaks into the firelight. A man's skin glows fever-red, lips cracked open in a whisper too small to hear. Blood bubbles from his chest, slow and final. Wolf crouches beside him. The man grips his sleeve. "Tell my lad, .. He doesn't finish. The fire pops. The body stills. Someone exhales too loudly. He carried a last pulse. That flicker of life became story, fuel, or sorrow's ashes. Night presses against the camp like an unseen siege. Torches flicker in cold gusts. Brother Finn walks between tents, whispering psalms through chattering teeth. Wolf reclines, half sleeping, sword wedged under his pack. His eyes never fully close. A horse nickers softly in the dark. A tent flap stirs without wind. The stars stare down, unblinking. They slept not, but dozed. One eye always open, one hand on history's weaponized promise. Beyond the circle of firelight, Wolf stands alone. His breath comes in short puffs, each one frosting his beard. He turns something over in his hand, a carved token, worn smooth. A talisman from a friend now buried. His jaw tightens. He chews leather again, not for hunger but to feel something familiar. Behind him, the fire crackles. Ahead, only dark. One night's end didn't erase fear, it layered it. Yet they woke again, hardened, alive, accident by accident. Twilight bleeds into black. Wolf kneels beside a fallen comrade. The man's eyes are open, seeing nothing. Frost clings to his beard like tears made visible. Wolf places the token gently into the man's stiffening fingers. A last act of grace. The horn sounds once soft, distant. The sky holds one final shade of purple before night swallows it whole. He rises, slow, turns back toward camp. In this war, death sat as buddy at the table. And yet, hearts still pumped, eyes still watched. Tomorrow, the march begins again. A runestone stands weathered in a northern field. Its face carved with warriors, ascending into Valhalla, shields high, spears straight, their gazes calm. Their carved eyes hold no fear, only purpose. Above them, winged Valkyries drift through stone clouds, arms outstretched, welcoming the slain. They marched toward death, not with dread, but with yearning. The battle was not the end, it was a gate, and beyond it, a hall of roaring firelight, endless feasts, and the gods themselves waiting in pride. In that belief, fear transformed. Mortality became a test, not a curse. Each clash of blade was a chance at eternal glory. They did not fight only for kings. They fought to be remembered in song forever, seated at the table of the honored dead. To fall in battle was noble. To run was unbearable. One man stands amid the chaos, raising a shattered shield with both hands as arrows whistle around him. Another turns to flee and silence follows him like a second shadow. Not relief, contempt. In these ranks, shame cut deeper than steel. A dropped sword might be forgiven. A dropped oath, never. A cracked shield wasn't just broken wood, it was a symbol of the last stand, the refusal to yield, but to live by flight, that life would be smaller than death. Better to fall forward than to live bowed. They carried this knowledge in every breath. It drove them onward because to return in disgrace was to die a second death at home. Their courage didn't spring from bravado, it was carved in prophecy. They believed fate word wove every life thread before the first cry. Valkyries weren't myth. They were truth, dressed in wings and steel, hovering over every field. Before battle, warriors touched charms carved with runes, whispered hymns to the skies, and passed tokens hand-to-hand, reminders that death wasn't random, it was assigned. One man presses a coin into the sky with trembling hands, eyes closed. Another traces falcon wings into the dirt beside his shield. This wasn't superstition, it was clarity. If they were meant to fall, they would. If not, no blade could find them. Fate didn't frighten them. It steadied their breath. There was no armor like trust. In the crush of battle, survival depended on the next man's shield. Not your own. Yours protected him. His protected you. The line held by faith in flesh and will. They stood shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same cold, blood-rich air. Each nudge of a shoulder, each ring of clashing shields, reminded them they were not alone. One breaks, all fall. That pact made cowards brave. Not from fear of punishment, but from knowledge that weakness wasn't private. It became everyone's undoing. This wasn't peer pressure. It was love made hard and sharper, steel bond forged in mud and bone. Before the blades sang, the voices did. By flickering firelight, men recited sagas not just of past victories, but of suffering endured. Each word laid another stone in their mental armor. They told of giants defeated, oaths fulfilled, ancestors who died standing. The stories weren't distractions. They were blueprints for bravery. Runes were etched at the edge of camp not for decoration, but to set intention. Rituals whispered under breath were as vital as the swords they carried. The mind needed shaping just as the body did. A forged psyche could hold when all else broke. But belief did not save them from sorrow. The ones who returned often returned broken. Not in limb but in spirit. The sagas speak quietly of the long walks home, of the nights without sleep, of runes carved not for protection but for mourning. A lone man kneels beside a cracked shield, his fingers tracing its lines again and again. A name is whispered, a breath caught. His tears freeze before they fall. For those who lived, the question was not just, why me, but why not him? Each memory was a blade turned inward. The battlefield did not just break bodies, it fractured souls. Dr. Sigrid Thorson leans forward in the firelit tent. Her fingers folded in thought. They weaponized belief, she says. Fear of shame outweighed fear of death. In studies of honor culture, the mind becomes a shield, expectation becomes armor. Men don't run because the idea of disgrace wounds deeper than any spear. Around her, animated overlays, pulse-mapping medieval minds to scales of fear, pride, and submission to fate. Their courage wasn't accidental. It was engineered, worn like mail. The body broke often, the psyche rarely. Their greatest armor wasn't steel but a mindset forged in destiny's fire. The torch fades low. The stone runes lose their clarity. Yet the ethos carved into them remains. The medieval soldier was not just a man of war. He was a vessel for centuries of belief, a psyche shaped by fear, faith, and fire. He was told stories, taught shame, given myths to wear like second skin. He marched not simply with sword in hand, but with an entire culture braced against his back. That mindset, honor before breath, fate before doubt, was the fire that carried him through rain, ruin, and blade. And long after the steel rusted, that fire still flickers in tales, in silence, in memory. A frost-bitten hand drags chalk across a wooden tally board, flour, pork, onions, scratched in the margins of desperation. The board is more feared than any battle map. The quartermaster's voice is hoarse as he counts aloud. No one speaks. They just listen and hope they're not skipped. Wolf returns with a sagging pouch of half-sprouted barley. Ira drops a bruised turnip into the stew pot, the skin mottled black from cold. Steam curls into the air like a ghost of better meals. The pot hisses, thin broth slapping against iron. Soldiers glance at it like it might evaporate from hope alone. Hunger hums beneath every task. The stomach becomes a second heartbeat, louder, more persistent. Every soldier is a scavenger. Every ration a prayer. The next village is already smoking by the time they arrive. Doors hang open. Ash drifts like snow. Still, they search. A goat squeals as it's dragged from a pen. A peasant, dirt-faced and trembling, holds up a net of smoked fish, offering it like a bribe to death. No one speaks much during these raids. There's no celebration, just survival. Wolf breaks open a root cellar with his boot. Inside, nothing but frozen cabbage and old onion peels. He takes them anyway. Beside the fire later, bones crack over flame, salt rubbed in by hands that shake less from cold than from something harder to name. They had to become wolves. Survival didn't care for righteousness. Snow flurries through the camp as the boy is brought forward. No older than 15. Rope burns on his wrists, fear in his eyes. The sergeant's voice is iron. 10 lashes, one for every broken oath. The whip cracks. Men don't look away. They don't speak. They grip their belts tighter. One counts silently with his fingers. Wolf's gaze drops. Brother Finn stands nearby, his lips moving in silent prayer, tears threading into his beard. The boy crumples after 7. He's dragged away. His back leaves a red trail in the snow. Obedience wasn't principle, it was necessity. Pain preserved order when words couldn't. The camp was murmuring with talk of mutiny. One too many bad meals. One too many lost patrols. Then the commander invoked the word decimation. A sack is brought out. Inside, 10 stones, 9 plain. 1 marked in red. Each man steps forward. One by one, they reach in. The 7th trembles. The red stone rests in his palm. No one breathes. He doesn't cry. He only nods. He knows. His sword brother is chosen to deliver the strike. And he does face blank, knuckles white. There is no riot, only silence. The sack is put away again. It won't be needed twice. Inside the makeshift field tent, a soldier bites down on leather as the barber surgeon applies a glowing iron to his thigh. The scream that follows is not singular, it's echoed by the man beside him, who hears it and knows his turn is next. Hands shake. Blood bubbles up from seams that no thread will close. There is no alcohol to drink, only a mash of poppy tea. A hand hovers in the offering prayer, or begging it to be over. Rosemary and yarrow are packed into wounds, not because they cure but because they sometimes don't kill. This isn't healing. It's halting death just long enough to send them back to fight. At dusk, with meat boiling low and wounds still bleeding, a skald begins to sing. The verses are bold tales of a great victory just days past. Names are invented, battles inflated, heroes exaggerated. The soldiers know it's a lie, and they laugh. But they listen. A few straighten their backs. One starts humming along. The firelight flickers against faces no longer drawn tight with dread, at least for a while. The harp's strings buzz, worn thin from frost and smoke. It's not truth they need. It's rhythm. A way to remember what they're supposed to be. Courage is a melody, even when it's made up. At the edge of camp, a pike holds a severed head. No words are spoken near it, but every man sees it. A bloodied sword is paraded past the ranks. Dipped in enemy red, it gleams with awful pride. From a belt, a soldier pulls a string of ears, tied like grisly medals. Another drinks from a cup taken from a dead man's table. They say it's for morale. But the message is broader. This is what victory looks like. This is what happens to those who stand in our way. To enemies, it's terror. To comrades, it's insurance. A reminder of what awaits the disloyal. In war, symbols are louder than speeches. The earth gives up its secrets slowly. A trench unearthed by archaeologists reveals rows of skeletons. Folded, ribs fractured, teeth clenched in final defiance. Their bodies had been arranged and dumped. Spines aligned, heads all turned east, like a final parade. A CT scan glows on screen, tracing blade notches along clavicles, deep gouges in femurs. The marks speak of organized death, not chaos, of discipline that lasted beyond breath. Professor Lars Nystrom gestures toward the image. Even in death, he says, they stayed in line. It was about memory, how they'd be remembered. That's how power endures. One ribcage crumbles as soil is brushed away, but the shape holds. A line once held in life, now fossilized in formation. Unity written in bone. In a modern training yard, boots hammer pavement in perfect cadence. Instructors bark and recruits crawl through dirt, leap over obstacles, fire rounds downrange under watchful eyes. It takes weeks 12, sometimes more, to sculpt them into soldiers. Precision, repetition, discipline. Now cut to the past. A field choked with frost, where a peasant is handed a spear worn smooth by many hands. No uniform, no drill. Just a command, shouted over wind, and a march into a bog he's never seen before. One world trains by method, the other by terror. Footfalls pound a parade ground, tight and drilled, then shift. Dissolve into the stumbling gait of feet dragging through knee-deep muck. They both march, only one is ready. Kevlar plates absorb a simulated hit. A helmet takes the brunt of shrapnel in slow motion. Today's soldier walks away. Now reverse the footage. A rusted mail shirt hangs heavy over padded cloth, barely shielding the ribs. A wooden shield splinters under a spear's thrust. No chance to walk away, only to fall slower. Medical stats scroll by 90% of modern battlefield injuries survive. Medivac wheels spinning through heat and dust. The arrowhead embedded in a bone tells a different story. Infection followed the shaft. Amputation, if lucky. Death, more often. We remember their courage, but forget how heavily it was taxed by equipment that failed, and medicine that couldn't. A drone camera hovers over rooftops, markers flash. No strike zones, civilians nearby. Orders are given. The weapon holds. Pull back through time. Smoke rises from a raised hamlet, women crying in the ruins. The code of chivalry protected noble blood, but not the homes of the poor. One knight spares a nobleman, another slaughters his serfs. Modern rules of engagement aim to protect civilians. But they can't erase risk. The fog of war lingers across centuries only, the terminology changes. Civilians still pay, still bleed. The restraint we celebrate today was once unknown. Now it's fragile. Always threatened, always vital. In a small, fluorescent-lit room, a modern soldier grips the armrest of a chair. A therapist listens. No sword between them, only silence. Elsewhere, centuries ago, a warrior sits by a dying fire in a timber hall. His chest heaves, his hands won't stop shaking. He drinks, but it doesn't help. The saga says he went quiet in the eyes. His brothers say he woke screaming. We know it now as PTSD. They knew it only as brokenness. L.T. Cole. Emma Clark watches footage on a small screen. Her voice softens. Psychological trauma isn't modern, it's just now we name it. 1,000 years apart, the mind still bleeds. Whether pierced by arrow or memory, a rifle is assembled piece by piece. Hands tighten bolts, check optics, steady, clinical. Then the view shifts, fingers closing around the hilt of a sword, knuckles white. The grip changes, but the purpose doesn't. Both weapons demand a will behind them. Intent shapes impact. On both sides of history, war bends not just iron but identity. Training doesn't just teach skill. It teaches direction. One weapon aims, the other slashes. But both ask the same question. Are you ready to use it? Steel, carbon fiber? No difference to the one who must decide when to strike. A shield bearer, not more than 14, watches his brother fall in a chaotic melee. He doesn't run. He takes the vacant spot, shield trembling. A combat medic crawls through mortar dust to drag a friend from debris, jacket torn, eyes burning with grit, but he doesn't stop. Courage doesn't evolve, it endures. A dented shield rises. A tactical vest straightens. Two hands hold the line, separated by centuries. The terrain shifts, the enemy changes uniform, but the terror, the surge in the chest, the will to stand despite it, that is timeless. It's never been about lack of fear, it's what's done in spite of it. A reenactment begins. The shield wall tightens under grey skies. Wooden shields lock, feet dig into the earth. The image dissolves. In its place, modern soldiers stand at parade restsum holding rifles, one holding a flag folded tight, another holds silence. Behind their eyes is memory. Beyond the ceremony, wait. The helmet left on a grave. The name etched into metal tags. The war that came home with them, unseen. We remember their bravery. But understanding their world teaches something deeper. Survival, isn't just strength, it's the system that protects the strong. History doesn't just echo. It instructs. A worn helm, a fingerprinted rifle, a long, empty field where no one speaks. To remember the past is to protect the present. The warrior's burden endures, and so must our care. A fog rolls over the hillside. Through its pale veil, the shapes emerge: shattered swords, split arrows, scraps of rusting mail, half swallowed by the earth. The silence isn't peace, it's memory. Wolf walks slowly across the uneven ground, armored but weary. His boots crunch bones turned to stone. Mud long since dried into history's scabbed skin. Around him, the ghosts of battle linger, not in sight, but in atmosphere. Above, crows circle, not screaming, just watching. He stops at a small wooden shrine. A rusted blade leans against a weathered stone, a hand-woven wreath pressed flat by wind and rain. Wolf lowers his helmet, closes his eyes. Across time, another figure breathes. A modern soldier in sterile light folds his Kevlar vest beside a brass plaque, one name, a rank, a date. He pauses, presses his palm to it, then steps back into the hallways. Hush. They never met, but they marched together. They fought without certainty, bled without mercy, and died as legends. For them, survival was rare, glory was brief. But their memory forged the steel spine of our history. Today's warriors stand on shoulders of steel, but those who came before marched with nothing but grit, faith, and fate. No medivac, no treaties, just cold ground, and colder odds. To live as a medieval soldier was to carry death on your back and hope in your heart. To die was expected. To survive was myth. And yet, From that suffering came the scaffolding of peace we now inherit. The systems, the laws, the value of a single life, they were forged not in ivory halls, but in fields red with sacrifice. So ask yourself not just what they endured, but why. What do you carry forward from their mud, sweat, and steel? What strength will you wield in your own battles? On fields, in boardrooms, in silence, in sorrow, in struggle. A broken sword, half buried in grass, light spills across its surface. The blade, though dulled, glints just enough. A raven settles beside it. Then stillness. Hope after horror.